Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we unpack the sources you send us and really pull out the most surprising nuggets of knowledge. Today, we're diving into excerpts from a truly provocative book called Heretics, which, frankly, turns a lot of our common modern assumptions right upside down.
It really does. It's fascinating because this deep dive, it really challenges us, makes us consider whether our modern pursuit of progress and liberty, well, whether it might actually be limiting how we understand what it even means to be human.
That's exactly it. That's the core. Our sources suggest that what we often just dismiss as heresy today could actually be a sign of, well, intellectual courage. And what we see as orthodox, the accepted way of thinking, might just be comfortable, sure, but ultimately unexamined, or maybe even wrong. The author argues that modern society has, in this quiet but really profound way, just stopped caring whether its fundamental beliefs are philosophically right.
Which raises a huge question for all of us, doesn't it? What actually happens when a society just abandons foundational beliefs, these big, comprehensive worldviews, even the ones it disagrees with? So our mission in this deep dive is to explore the author's pretty bold claims about how this shift has impacted, well, almost everything, art, politics, our personal lives, even how we think about health.
Okay, right. Let's unpack this core idea first, this almost paradoxical idea. How the meanings of heresy and orthodoxy seem to have completely flipped. Our sources highlight that heretic used to imply this pride in being right, a lone figure standing like a church against a world they thought was misguided.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating is how the author describes this reversal. He says that today, people actually boast about being heretical,
Yep.
seen as a sign of being clear-headed, courageous, right, a free thinker. But orthodoxy, sticking to established beliefs, that now almost automatically means you're old-fashioned or just wrong.
So what's the big takeaway from this flip? What does it all mean? Well, it seems to mean we've stopped valuing whether our basic philosophies are actually correct. The author gives this striking, almost shocking analogy. He says it's infinitely more absurd and unpractical than burning a man for his philosophy, to just say his philosophy does not matter. Just think about that for a second.
He really hammers this home, too. Imagine, sitting at a normal tea table and someone just casually says, life is not worth living. Most of us would just, shrug it off, like someone commenting on the weather, right? Nobody thinks it could have any serious effect. Yet the author argues, if that statement were truly believed, well, the world would stand on its head. Well, the world would stand on its head. Murderers would get medals, firemen would be denounced, doctors called when people were well. It really shows the profound impact, or maybe the lack of impact, we now give to our deepest beliefs.
It's a surprising twist, isn't it? Our freedom itself, the freedom brought about by earlier liberals who, removed the gags from all the heresies to encourage new discoveries, that very freedom has ironically led to a state where, as he puts it, cosmic truth is so unimportant that it cannot matter what anyone says. It's like we opened the floodgates, and now maybe nothing seems to matter.
And that brings up a potent question. Has good taste, which the author provocatively calls the last and vilest of human superstitions, has that managed to silence serious debate where the old restrictions failed? He points out it used to be bad taste to be an open atheist, but now, he argues, emancipation has only locked the saint in the same tower of silence as the heresiarch. Both deep belief and deep unbelief are just considered sort of impolite to discuss seriously.
Yet, our author insists that for some people, including himself, the most practical, the most important thing about someone is still their view of the universe. He says it's more critical for a landlady to know her lodger's philosophy than his income, or for a general to understand the enemy's philosophy, not just their numbers. That's a pretty radical idea for today, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. And he drives this point home with a rather uncomfortable comparison. He contrasts the 15th century, where people would, cross-examine and torment a man because he preached some immoral attitude, with the 19th century, where we feted and flattered Oscar Wilde for preaching such an attitude, only to then break his heart in prison because he actually carried it out. It's a ludicrous modern inconsistency, he calls it. We celebrate the idea, maybe, but punish the action. It shows we don't truly believe ideas have real consequences.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting for society as a whole. The author links this philosophical lightness, this indifference towards core beliefs, to a general decline in society's vigor. He claims that when a society starts getting weak and ineffective, it begins to talk endlessly about efficiency instead of clearly defining its aims. It's like being really busy but having no idea what you're busy for.
That's a crucial insight, I think. He contrasts this with strong men in the strong ages. Figures like, say, Hildebrand, the medieval pope pushing church authority, or Danton in the French Revolution.
Well,
People who worked for grand ideals, the Catholic Church, or liberty, equality, fraternity. They focused on the end, the ultimate goal, not just the process. He calls today's focus on mere efficiency the mark of paralytics, or small men.
and this deliberate avoidance of big words and big visions, according to the source, has led to a race of small men in politics, and in the arts, too. Our modern politicians, he says, they claim the colossal license of Caesar and the Superman. They talk big. But the upshot of it all is that a mediocrity is Chancellor of the Exchequer. Big talk, small results, essentially.
Right, and this connects directly to his sharp critique of modern popular phrases. He sees them as clever dodges, ways to sort of shirk the problem of deciding what is actually good. Take liberty, for instance. As it's often used today, he argues it just means, let us not decide what is good, but let it be considered good not to decide it. It's liberty from defining the good, not liberty to pursue it.
And progress is an even more extreme example of this, isn't it? Our source describes it as simply a comparative of which we have not settled the superlative. We choose it over known ideals, he says, aiming for a great deal more of nobody knows what. It's just movement for movement's sake, with no clear destination in mind.
Yeah, he insists you can't be truly progressive without being doctrinal, without having a clear belief or doctrine about where you're going. Progress, he says, by its very name indicates a direction, and it is precisely about the direction that we disagree. You simply can't progress if you haven't agreed on the destination.
He highlights this point further in his critique of Mr. H.G. Wells, the famous writer. While Wells apparently saw that new economists had lost the power to generalize, the author argues Wells himself, in Mankind in the Making, falls into this enormous modern error. He shirks the fundamental questions, too.
Right. For instance, Wells discusses life as a tissue of births, focuses on getting satisfactory parents, but completely avoids the deeper question, what is the good of begetting a man until we have settled what is the good of being a man? The author compares it to asking, what is the use of a hammer? And getting the answer, to make hammers. You just keep delaying the ultimate purpose indefinitely. It's a really compelling way to show that lack of fundamental direction.
That's a powerful critique, isn't it? The whole idea that progress actually needs a fixed direction, or that focusing only on efficiency might mask a deeper societal weakness. It really makes you rethink some of those common phrases we use all the time. So moving into the arts and the broader cultural mood, our deep dive reveals what the author calls a negative spirit in modern ethics and literature. He argues that modern morality, it can only point with absolute conviction to the horrors that follow breaches of law. Its only certainty is a certainty of ill. It knows what's bad, but not necessarily what's good.
Which suggests, he thinks, a great gap in modern ethics, an absence of vivid pictures of purity and spiritual triumph. He claims that realistic literature, like Ibsen's plays, isn't horrifying just because it's candid or honest, but because of its absence of a clear idealism. There's no positive vision to balance the darkness.
Right, so if Dante's Divine Comedy had heaven, purgatory, and hell, our author quips that Ibsen's Ghosts has only one hell. He says Ibsen is very decisive about evil, portrays it clearly, but he's remarkably vague about what is really wisdom and virtue. Even falsehood leads to ruin, sure, but then truth works equal ruin in The Wild Duck, another Ibsen play. It's almost like everything just leads to disaster or unhappiness.
Yeah, and it all kind of leads to what Bernard Shaw apparently summarized about Ibsen. The golden rule is that there is no golden rule. The author argues this leaves us with these really definite images of evil, but no definite image of good. In his view, it's like we've fallen a second time and only the knowledge of evil remains to us. That's a pretty bleak assessment of the modern mind, wouldn't you say?
Definitely bleak. And this worldview, he says, is reflected, maybe surprisingly, in what he calls the mildness of the yellow press. You know, the sensationalist journalism of his day. We usually attack it for being sensational, over the top. But our source argues its real vice is being insupportably tame, designed for the faint and languid recreation of men whom the fierceness of modern life has fatigued. It's not actually shocking, he thinks, it's just bland.
And the key here, he argues, is the profound lack of moral courage, or even immoral courage in that kind of journalism. When they do attack something, he says, they never reach the point of attacking anything which is large and real. Instead, they target something like the War Office, something that is, which everybody attacks and nobody bothers to defend. They just go for the easy target, the one everyone already dislikes.
And this leads him to a really powerful paradox. Every man, however brave, who begins by worshiping violence, must end in mere timidity. Every man, however wise, who begins by worshiping success must end in mere mediocrity. He says the worship of success is unique. It's the only one out of all possible worships that its followers are foredoomed to become slaves and cowards. It sounds almost like a spiritual trap, doesn't it?
It's a really profound observation, and it connects the individual to these bigger societal trends. He applies it to figures like Mr. George Moore, a writer of the time. Moore, despite having a genuinely forcible mind, is described as being in a perpetual state of temporary honesty. The author suggests Moore's real problem with life is that it is not a dream that can be molded by the dreamer. He struggles with the dogma of the reality of this world, basically the stubborn fact that other people and objective reality exist outside his own head.
That's a great insight into how he views Moore. Moore's self-centeredness, which our author calls a dusty egoism, contrasting it with Robert Louis Stevenson's windy vanity, ultimately makes him totally ineffectual. He has pugnacity, he's ready to fight, but he lacks the tenacity of conviction to actually win anything significant. He just shifts from one temporary stance to the next. Okay, so our deep dive now brings us to the simple life, something often linked with figures like Tolstoy. But our author argues that its proponents actually would make us simple in the unimportant things, but complex in the important things. That seems backwards.
It absolutely does. Counterintuitive. They want us to simplify our diet, our clothes maybe, but then get overly complex in our philosophy or our loyalties. The author, quite amusingly, argues for the opposite, high living and plain thinking. And he provocatively states that ritualism is older than any religion. He even says, there is more simplicity in the man who eats caviar on impulse than in the man who eats grape nuts on principle. It's a real jab at overthinking everyday choices.
He even suggests, quite provocatively, that the real secret to health, strength, grace isn't taking thought or endlessly rationalizing about our bodies. It's thinking about something else entirely, like the kingdom of God and his righteousness. It's almost like saying true well-being comes when you look beyond yourself.
And this feeds directly into his critique of the scientific study of human nature. He suggests that scientists, by deliberately suppressing their natural human sympathies and intuition, which they might do to understand something tiny like a microbe, they actually become preternaturally stupid in dealing with the heart of man. They lose the big picture by focusing too narrowly.
It's a surprising take, isn't it? He suggests a man can understand a great deal of anthropology merely by being a man, end quote. The secrets of, say, savage tribes and their rituals aren't just found in books or long voyages. They're found in the ordinary commerce of man with man, in your own heart, even at a subscription ball or in church. It's all about understanding human nature from the inside out.
He takes this even further. He argues that anything that has passed through the human mind becomes incurably mysterious and infinite, and therefore it's finally and forever spoiled for all purposes of science. A man's desire for something simple, like a pork chop, he says, remains literally as mystical and ethereal as his desire for heaven. Human desires, even mundane ones, are fundamentally mysterious to him.
He also challenges that common idea that widespread stories, like, say, William Tell, are just myths because you find versions of them in different cultures. He makes a distinction. Some stories are common because they're just really good stories, peculiar, compelling. But others, like the story of the strong man ruined by a woman, think Samson and Delilah or Arthur and Guinevere, they're common because they tell the truth about people. They reflect universal human experiences that happen everywhere.
And this leads to a fascinating reevaluation of anthropomorphism, attributing human traits to non-human things. He argues primitive people pictured something semi-human behind everything, not because it was a natural thought, but because it was supernatural. Not because it made things simpler or more comprehensible, but because it made them 100 times more incomprehensible and mysterious. A tree only really frightens us, he says, when it looks like a man. And when the whole universe looks like a man, we fall on our faces. It becomes profoundly awesome, maybe terrifying.
Okay, so our deep dive now takes us to what the author calls the new paganism. But he pretty quickly dismantles it. He argues it's no longer new, and crucially, never at any time bore the smallest resemblance to paganism. The actual ancient pagans, he contends, were characterized by a rather too rigid dignity and a much too rigid responsibility. And their one great sin was actually despair. He's saying modern self-styled pagans completely misunderstand the original deal.
Right. And he makes the very striking claim that only Christianity has truly confronted paganism head-on and genuinely transformed it. In fact, he states, quite boldly, that everything else in the modern world is of Christian origin, even everything that seems most anti-Christian. That includes huge movements like the French Revolution, the rise of physical science, even the very act of attacking Christianity itself. He sees Christian thought as a fundamental backdrop for almost all Western ideas, even the rebellious ones.
Wow. And this leads him to redefine some core Christian virtues in these wonderfully paradoxical ways. Charity, he says, is the power of defending that which we know to be indefensible. Hope is the power of being cheerful in circumstances which we know to be desperate. And faith is the power of believing that which we know to be untrue, though he immediately clarifies it's not one atom more paradoxical than hope or charity. He seems to be getting at a deeper truth, something beyond simple logic or proof.
And this brings us to humility. He describes as a great psychological discovery that marked the transition from paganism into Christianity. The pagan, he says, set out to enjoy himself, but discovered that a man cannot enjoy himself and continue to enjoy anything else. It's like enjoyment becomes self-defeating if it's the only goal. True, lasting enjoyment, the author suggests, comes from reducing our ego to zero. It's only when we stop being the absolute center of our own universe that we can truly appreciate everything else around us.
So he says, to the humble man, and to the humble man alone, the sun is really a sun. It's about seeing things as they are, not just how they relate to you. He also argues that Thomas Carlyle's belief that men were mostly fools is actually topped by Christianity's surer and more reverent realism that they are all fools, which he connects directly to the doctrine of original sin and, interestingly, the equality of all people. It's a universal, humbling realization for everyone.
Yeah, and what's really illuminating here is his argument that progress is obviously the antithesis of independent thinking. Because, he says, true progress actually requires the careful study and assumption of the whole of the past. You can't genuinely move forward if you just ignore or dismiss everything that came before. It's a strong pushback against constantly trying to reinvent the wheel.
He also delivers a pretty sharp critique of what he calls the fallacy of the young nation, especially thinking about places like America or other former colonies. He points out, just because a club or a nation was founded recently doesn't automatically mean it's vigorous or guaranteed to last. It might go bankrupt tomorrow. It challenges that simple equation of youth equals strength.
That's a powerful point for us to consider, even today. No human thing is destined to be anything. Destiny isn't guaranteed. The warning for America, he suggests back then, wasn't how close it was to its birth, but how near it may be to its end. He saw symptoms like politics breaking up into bewildering opportunism and insincerity, or fighting smaller powers while pretending they were great, like in the war with Spain he mentions. It's really a call for self-awareness for any nation, at any time.
And finally, we circle back to that core argument about dogma, about conviction. The author argues that mental advance actually means growth into more and more definite convictions, into more and more dogmas. Having strong beliefs isn't the problem. It's the sign of a developed mind. In his view, a brain too clever to believe anything is like a nail too good to hold down a carpet. It sounds like he's saying indecision isn't intelligence, it's a failure of purpose.
Exactly, and he directly challenges that common idea that ideas themselves are dangerous. He says they are least dangerous to the man of ideas because he's familiar with them, knows how to handle them, how to argue. Ideas are most dangerous, he thinks, to the man of no ideas because the first idea will fly to his head like wine to the head of a teetotaler. Without your own set of ideals or beliefs, he says, you're in permanent danger of fanaticism. A sort of blank slate is just easily obsessed.
And the ultimate paradox he leaves us with is this. The modern world, he says, is filled with men who hold dogmas so strongly that they do not even know that they are dogmas. He points to things like unquestioning belief in progress or collecting facts for the sake of facts as examples of these unacknowledged modern dogmas. We can see the full frenzy, he says, of medieval people who might have killed themselves to find the sepulcher of Christ. But we often don't see the full frenzy of those who kill themselves to find the North Pole. He's implying one kind of intense, perhaps irrational devotion is just replaced by another.
His final really powerful statement is that religion, and he means a fundamental worldview here, is exactly the thing which cannot be left out because it includes everything. He argues our general view of existence, our metaphysics, creates and involves everything we say or do. Every person, whether they realize it or not, must hold a metaphysical system and hold it firmly. There's really no escaping having some kind of worldview.
Wow. This deep dive really forces you, doesn't it, to question your own unconscious assumptions about modern life, about progress. It suggests that maybe, by trying so hard to escape dogma, we've just swapped old, acknowledged beliefs for new, unexamined ones,
Hmm.
and often maybe to our detriment.
Yeah, and the author's embrace of paradox is really striking. The idea that frivolity is a part of the nature of man, that all philosophical problems tend to become paradoxical, that life is a riot. It's such a powerful counter to the kind of solemnity or seriousness he sees blocking the way in a lot of modern thought. He seems to be inviting us to find some joy and mystery in life's contradictions.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What dogmas are you holding on to without even realizing it? And what might you gain? What new perspectives might open up if you dare to actually define what you believe, even if it feels heretical by today's standards?
Our author definitely challenges us. He wants us to be more firm than a bigot and more terrible than a fanatic, a man with a definite opinion.
Mhm.
It sounds extreme, but I think it's really an invitation to a deeper, maybe more courageous form of thinking. Even if that thinking leads you to some unexpected conclusions. It's about intellectual honesty, maybe, and conviction.
Perhaps the ultimate takeaway here is that genuine progress, real insight, maybe even joy. Perhaps those things can only truly flourish when we stop trying to skirt the big questions,
Yeah.
when we actually engage with them head on and embrace the very paradoxes and dogmas we've often been taught to avoid or dismiss.
So here's a thought to leave you with. If, as the author poetically puts it, eternity is the eve of something, and the stars are the fires of a schoolboy's rocket fixed in their everlasting fall, what unacknowledged festivity, what hidden celebration or meaning might you discover in the universe if you dared to look at it with fresh eyes, with perhaps a defined belief?